in chemistry education at the University of Michigan. She graduated with a Bachelor of Science in Chemical Engineering from the National Autonomous University of Mexico in Mexico and obtained her PhD in Learning Sciences and Policy from the University of Pittsburgh. Thanks to her unique combination of chemistry disciplinary knowledge and education, she became the first chemistry education researcher named a future leader in chemistry in the year 2019 by Cass from ACS. And Paulette's going to tell us about her journey to QuantCrit, how the scientist met the fugitive in the Borderlands. Paulette.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here and to see so many people from both Chemed and from other subdisciplines in chemistry in this talk. So I'm not going to talk about a specific study today. I'm going to talk about both my foundations for my research program. So I think it's really important for you to know what do you get when you work with me, or if you hire me, please hire me. So I'm going to focus my time talking both about my theoretical foundations and my methodological foundations. And then when you see this, and then the work that I'm writing now that it's under review or that it's close to submission, then you're going to be able to see how this talk is actually building, helping build that, right? I'm going to start by doing a country acknowledgement. Today, I'm talking to you from a city that we usually call Ann Arbor, Michigan, but it's in reality the land of the Potawatomi people, right? And so I want to stand here today and share with you that it's important that we recognize that we're standing on colonized land and that we are profiting still from this land that we have colonized. And so the University of Michigan is today built on their land, and we didn't need a university to share knowledge. Knowledge has always been shared on these places. And I invite you to research who are the owners of the land you're standing on today. On my first year in grad school, I was part of a grant. And as you may know, sometimes as being part of a grant, you need to show your results to like an advisory board, right? And so you get all this money and you're supposed to show your results, so the advisory board sort of puts a stamp of approval saying what we're doing is sort of right. Okay, so the grant I was part of did that, and we invited the advisory board to Pittsburgh, and my advisor said, you know, you've been working on this paper. I'm very proud of you, right? You're a first year grad student. I think you should have the opportunity to present your work. And I was so excited, right? I thought, oh my God, my advisor trusts me to do this presentation. Like they want me to show off, right? Super, super cool. So I stand, you know, in front of, you know, about 10, 12 people who are seen as like really important people in the field, right? I give my presentation and we get to the Q&A. The first person raises their hand, asks a question, but they don't ask the question to me. They turn around and they ask the question to my advisor. My advisor handles this by saying, hey, Paulette is the one who did the study. So, you know, ask a question to her. So the person just turned around to me and didn't even like rephrase the question. Like they just like, okay, answer now, right? And this happened like 3 or 4 times. So every time somebody raised their hand, they would not direct the question to me. They will direct it to my advisor, expecting him to answer. Even though repeatedly my advisor will tell them that I was the one who did the study and who should be answering the questions. When this happened, I actually felt a lot of anxiety, right? I thought maybe, you know, I had a very thick accent and nobody understood what I was saying. Maybe my presentation skills suck. Maybe this was the moment my advisor would realize he should never have accepted me into a PhD program. Later that night, we went for dinner. You know, we were in this fancy restaurant and we were sitting with the advisory board members. And one of the advisory board members was sitting next to me and she said, hey, so you're from Mexico, right? And I thought in that moment, maybe very naively, that she wanted to hear about my journey, right? And so I was very excited and said, yes, I'm a proud alumni of the National University, Goya, right? I went to the School of Chemistry. I spent all my time with chemists. I did research in organic chemistry. If you follow me on Twitter back on those times, you would have seen pictures of my bench and it looked like this. No surprises here about all the pink. I was part of a paper. I was a co-author in it and I was in charge of doing physics molecules, and they were my babies. And I also did an undergraduate honors thesis, right? And I made this molecule through this synthetic wrap. So I was saying all of this, and she's like, no, that was not what I was asking. I was like, I'm just surprised you like to do statistical methods. And I didn't know what she meant. And she said, well, is that you're Mexican? And I was like, so where do you learn math? I, in that moment, didn't even know what to say, right? I said, like, I don't know, elementary school, high school, right? But she kept pressing, right? No, it just doesn't make any sense. Like you went to school in Mexico, so why would you be good at math, right? Are your parents doctors? They went to grad school. Are they also scientists? And I was like, no, my mom is a teacher, right? Elementary school teacher. My dad's an accountant. She's like, doesn't make any sense. Your parents are not scientists, like you. And through all this interrogation, nobody in the table said anything. Nobody stopped her and said, like, maybe this is an inappropriate thing to ask a student, right? And later, I asked my advisor why this has happened. He didn't hear what was happening. He was like at the other side of the table. He said, well, like, she's a math educator. And so, like, to her, right, Latinx women just don't do good in math. And this answer didn't satisfy me, right? Like, this sounded like a very bad answer. But it's true, right? Like, when you work in STEM and you're a professor, right? And you think about which students are ready to go to college and blah, 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 right? You traditionally look at SAT scores, right? And if you look at SAT math scores, you would see that Latinx women on average score about the 30th percentile. I'm showing, of course, a binary sex graph because the SAT, the College Board doesn't acknowledge intersex people. And so there's only male and female options for you to register for it. And so this is part of the problem, right? Like, this sort of tests are used to measure us, to judge us, and then they sort of become the truth, right? The people's perception about who we get to be becomes the truth. And it's not only about scoring lower, right? It's about, we don't even get to the 50th percentile. So this graph is the same graph as I was showing, but instead of showing you the overall score, I'm showing how many points below or above 520 you are. And that is the 50th percentile of the math SAT. And so Latinx women on average score minus 58 points, right? However, if you happen to be Latinx and your parents are doctors, went to grad school, are part of STEM, and you're female, right, you would average across 2 points. And so that is why she was so intent on trying to understand, right, like, why it didn't make sense I did quant. And this was really weird to me for another reason, is because I was being treated as a person of color, but as Mexican, I actually am light skin, right? I'm a Mexican with light skin, and in Mexico, I actually are treated better, right, than other people because my skin is lighter. On average, actually, people with light skin in Mexico will get more years of schooling, right? I was going to grad school, I finished college. And so Mexico is a racist place, right? The same as the US, the way we see racism works differently, right? However, in Mexico, I was part of the people in power. But when I moved to the United States, I was racialized. And all these ideas about Latinos were imposed on me. And this actually studied concept about how when we are immigrants, right, we get this clash of cultures and we have our perception of reality and then the perception of reality of the new place, and we don't know which one is the truth anymore. And this is why these are all social constructs. And in the United States, the reason why I'm seen as somebody that cannot do math and apparently should not have even finished elementary school is because, right, of how in the past we have talked about Latinos, but also about the current policies we have for them. It's about how they were represented in cartoons in the past, but also how we're currently represented, right? And so we live in a world where we're only represented as people that can be mates or sex objects, right? Why would you expect me to be doing a PhD degree in the United States. And these drove me, right? This sort of experience is sort of experience that marks you. And so I try to study then how my science identity was constructed, and how other people's science identity was constructed. And in a way, what I wanted to do is to understand how this was built. So if people went through bad experiences like mine, they would not feel like they could not be scientists anymore. So I thought in that moment back then, when I started grad school, that if I could crack the code about this, then I would be able to support marginalized people. And so this was my dissertation. And basically what I found, right, is that when you want to see yourself as a scientist, you ascribe characteristics you see in others. And so you see what other people that are scientists look like or what they do. And you see, oh, these things I have in common, right? And I say, I have these characteristics too. So I ascribe them to myself and I say, well, maybe I'm a scientist. And then you form part of groups of scientists, right? And you expect to be welcomed. So this was the research group I was part in as an undergrad, right? And so I was welcomed with them. And so they made me feel like I could be a chemist. And so being accepted in science community feels this. And this cycle sort of like continues, right? And the problem is what happens when this acceptance in the community doesn't work, right? Because of who you are, so your social identity. And so I continue to study this. And so this is something that I'm going to put in a category called intellectual resources. And by intellectual resources, I'm going to refer to both the chemistry knowledge, pure scientific sense making. So that is the practices that we use in chemistry or in science to do science, and also affective resources. So motivation, like science identity, competency beliefs. And I published a bunch on this topic. And then I moved on to try to understand how the learning environment affected this. So sort of like what Nicole showed, right? If we change a classroom and we change the way we're teaching, can we actually improve the way people develop their affective, like their intellectual resources? And so I started doing some research on this, and I was very excited. I thought, okay, this is the thing, right? Like if we fix the classroom, then we're going to help students. And then I got into a theoretical and methodological problem. You see, focusing on the learning environment and intellectual resources is okay, right? But then how do you account for how we perceive chemistry culture and systemic oppression? And the current theories that I had at hand in chemistry education research were not allowing me to account for this. And that is because we usually have focused more in the psychological process, right? The internal process, how the student perceives the teacher, how we can change, reform, like how we can reform classrooms and what happens in the student internally. But we have not studied so much what is the effect of this societal perception of our cultural and chemistry on students. And so I was struggling to figure out how to add this into my work. The other reason this is hard is because we have certain ideas about what a chemist is, and these ideas are wrong. So I'm showing you different letters by different people that are seen as really famous researchers. And in these letters, you'll see that they tend to say that students need to work X hours amount of weeks. You have to have these behaviors, X, Y, and Z. And if you're incapable of doing this, you should not even be in this lab, right? And we have taken these things and we have added it to our perception of what a chemist is, right? And we have tied it to the identity of what a chemist should be. But this is not identity and this is not chemistry. This is called epistemic ignorance. Epistemic ignorance means barriers that were specifically created to keep people out, right? And to keep power within a few people. And so all these rules about what a chemist is supposed to be that have nothing to do with understanding molecules, right, are actually barriers that we have put in place. So only a few people continue. So we can say that we are the filter. So we can say we're being the defenders of the true knowledge of chemistry, right? And that is why actually chemistry departments don't feel bad that their failing rates are high or that their withdrawal rates are high, like this called DNW, right? They actually boast it. They say, no, we're the highest number in this university and we're proud of it, right? Because we're keeping the not worthy out. So again, remember, this is not chemistry. This is epistemic ignorance. And so how do you account for this? Well, if you are a synthetic chemist and you need to create a bond, right? And you go to literature, you sometimes run into the problem that you either need to do your synthesis in a completely different route, right? Or spend all your time doing like 20 reactions and that are not going to be super effective and that are going to have a lot of waste and it's going to take a lot of time, right? just to form a bond. And so either you go through a different route or you need to come up with a new reaction. And I'm sure a lot of you right now are having like memories of grad school, and I'm sorry for like mentioning that. But I did something similar. So because I didn't have a theory that I could find in the literature would allow me to connect these things to chemistry learning, I created a theoretical framework. And this is called the Resources for Equitable Activation of Chemical Thinking Framework. The point of this framework is not only that it helps me use the work that great people in chemistry education research have used about understanding the psychological process, but I have centered this process in equity. And so the point of this framework is that it's gonna help me and other people look for research in chemistry education that actually is equity centered, right? And that it's the foundation of it. Because if we don't look for equity from the beginning, we're not gonna get it retroactively. And so in this framework, you can focus both on learner resources, right? How the learning environment works. You can also study how the effect of the university context is affecting this. So it's not the same to be in a research-led institution than a primarily undergrad institution, a historically Black university, or a Hispanic serving institution. The way departments are funded, the size of the classes is different. So there's many, many things that change depending on what institution you're looking at. And it's important that we account for it. And finally, this theory is also accounting for our ideas of who gets to be a chemist or who doesn't get to be a chemist, right? So now we have a theoretical framework. We have a simplified version of reality that is supposed to help us study this, right? And so then we need to move on into what is the problem. And the problem is that when we get somebody that wants to be a chemist, right, we expect them to form part of our culture and sort of assimilate, to change a lot of who they are, right? So if you're a woman, if you're trans non-binary, if you're queer, if you're Black, if you're Latino, if you're Latina, right? It doesn't matter, right? The point is you need to change and you need to fit into this box of what a chemist is supposed to be. Right, that is the current way in which we do things. And the curriculum reform that we do is actually assuming this. It's assuming that students need to fit into this box, right? And so instead of that, what I want you to think is that instead of doing that, I want you to think about marginalized students arriving to your classroom, right? And instead of thinking of this box of being a chemist as like closed, I want you to think about it as like a porous thing. And what is going to happen is that we need to create things in the classroom and in our institutions and as part of societies in chemistry that allow marginalized chemists to arrive, right? And to instead of being forced to leave away their social identities, is to help them navigate both worlds. Because what is happening is that we need to negotiate the contradictions and tensions of belonging to two different cultures. One is our social identity that doesn't match this hetero, patriarchal, white, cis perception of who is a chemist, right? And the other is who we are. And if we create changes at every level that allow people to navigate this border and to not have to choose between one or the other, right? And to live with the two, what we're gonna cause as a consequence is that the borders of what chemistry is are gonna amplify. Right? And we're going to actually change the culture, which is the point. And so this is the theoretical foundation. Now I'm going to talk about the methodological one and how I became a fugitive from positivism. Currently in chemistry education research, if you want to do a study and it's a quantitative study, this is what happens, right? You look at an achievement gap and you say, these people are doing good, these people are doing bad. You simplify the model, you go measure some stuff, right? I go measure their grades. I go measure like their concept inventory. I go measure their affective resources. I go measure stuff. I plug my data into RStudio and then I publish a paper. I clap. I get like a lot of congratulations and then I move on, right? Nothing happens. And I'm being sarcastic on purpose. And I'm not criticizing like quantitative people just because like to be mean. This is something I've done and I want to publicly acknowledge that a lot of the work I've done in the past and as part of my grad school research has done really, has done things that maybe had good intentions, but that doesn't matter because the end product, right, is that it was deeply problematic and created problems for other people. And so I started the same way, right? I would see an achievement gap, right? So people actually perform differently in SAT. I simplified my model and I said, the SAT math predicts general chemistry 1 grades, and women come with different SAT scores. They tend to score lower, right? And ergo, their general chemistry grades are lower. And if you read that paper, that's sort of like what happened. However, this model is saying the effect of being women, right, on SAT means that you're going to perform differently, right, because you're a woman or because you're a man. The first problem with this is that, first of all, is not saying sexism. It's not saying women are treated bad in science and ergo, this is why they're not performing as good. It's saying that because they're women. Second problem is that I use the word gender, not sex. I use the term women, non-female, and this is effectively erasing the identities and the existence of non-binary and trans people, right? So I use the incorrect term, and also like I acted like they did not exist. And so again, and my language said the effect of gender, the effect of being a woman, right? And this is almost saying that this is genetical. So this is a problem that we have currently in the way we do quantitative methods in chemistry education research, biology education research, and a lot of research. And this is because there's a tension. And this tension is that we're pretending that because we're quantitative, we're supposed to be this positivist people that should only work on the things that we can quote unquote measure. And that if I dare bring in my experiences in the past or the experiences of marginalized people, I'm not being objective, right? And that should only focus on the truth. On the other side, qualitative people will say, well, of course, you're going to do equity work in quantitative methods, and you should never have tried because the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. That is what Audre Lorde said. And you should never disagree with Audre Lorde, and I won't. However, I don't think quantitative methods are the master's tools. The master's tools is white supremacy. And so when we take white supremacy out of quantitative methods, we actually are going to be able to do equity work with it. And so this is what I'm going to call sort of like a Borderlands stance, where I'm using a method that is originally based on white supremacy practices, and I'm going to remove the white supremacy and I'm going to move it to criticalism, and I'm going to live in this sort of border between these two worlds. And so why do I'm saying that like stats are white supremacists? Well, I'm going to tell you a story of stats. This is Francis Galton. Francis Galton was a Victorian scientist, you know, Victorian England. He was really rich. And there was two things he loved in life. One was charts, and the other one was the Origin of Species book written by his cousin, Darwin. And so when he read that book, he said, this totally explains why me and Darwin's family are full of smart people. And then our cousins got married, and then they had more people. And obviously the men are super, super smart, emphasis on the men, because they come from super, super smart families. And look at this chart, this proves it, hearts, right? Hearts to charts, hearts to this theory. And so he wanted to implement this theory mathematically and apply it to social, like to studying people. Right. And so he created some statistical methods. And one of the methods that you may recognize from the ones he created is called regression. So he's actually the person who invented regression, which we use in chemistry education research all the time. And he also is the father of a field. He's the father of the field of eugenics. He created it. He created the journal. He created the discipline. He trained people on it. And he believed statistics would be the tool that will lead us to that, right? To actually get into a world where we can only breathe correctly, the correct people. And one of the people he trained under this sort of tradition, it's a man named Carl Pearson. You may have heard of him. He created this concept called correlation, and we call it the Pearson correlation. And he also went on and say that statistics is the grammar of science, and that statistics will be the thing that would allow us to be objective and to find the truth and to actually study things correctly. He also was one of the first people to conduct education research. And so he went to a classroom of kids and was interested, not in math SAT, right? This is the 1800s. He was interested on intelligence. So we're gonna say he actually published on a thing called their average intelligence score, and he created the scale, and he said a normal adult person will score around 100, right? And so he went into classrooms, measured white kids, and white kids got scores around the 90s, which made sense. Kids are under development, right? And so like they should not like be at 100, but you can see they're close. Obviously, women like obviously, right, lower scores, but like he knew all this already because men are smarter. And of course, again, he didn't study Latinx kids. He studied Jewish kids. And what he found using the scale that he developed was that Jewish kids will score lower. And so let's go back what I said about the way we do statistics currently. I say we find an achievement gap and we simplify the model, right? And this is exactly the thing Carl Pearson did. He looked at an achievement gap and simplified the model, and he said, race predicts IQ, the effect of race on IQ. The same way that I said the effect of gender on SAT, right, back then. His conclusion was that taking an average and regarding both sexes, this alien Jewish population is somewhat inferior physically and mentally to the native population, and therefore should not be allowed to enter British borders. Because if we allow them to come, they will taint our genetic pool because they're not sending us their best people. And so what do we do? Because the way we're doing stats now is reproducing exactly this. And so no matter if we try to do equity work, by using these principles, we're gonna keep doing work that emphasizes white supremacy. So we need to move from this pretend that positivism is a thing that is possible, because it's not. So we cannot be truly objective because we all come with biases. We all have experiences that affect the way we live our scientific lives. And as chemistry education researchers, we should move to criticalism. And by criticalism, I mean that we're going to use the theories of marginalized groups, the work they created, right? The theories they have used. And we're going to try to come up with a way to use them with statistics. And this is what I'm calling, and other people are calling QuantCrit, quantitative criticalism. And I've talked a lot about theoretical, so like, Paulette, can you please give us an example? Of course I can. I'm going to give you a couple of examples, and I'm actually also going to try to explain how this can affect your life as a chemist, even if you're not doing chemistry education research. So like you get bonus, you're learning chemistry education research, and you're getting tips today about how to be a less terrible person. So principle one of QuantCrit is that you need to always contextualize systems of oppression. So if you're the kind of person that thinks that sexuality, gender identity, race have nothing to do with science, right? This is about science. Who cares about these things? First of all, I don't know why you stay 28 minutes listening to me talk, because we clearly don't agree on anything. But second of all, right, I don't know, maybe because the housing policies that we have, the criminal justice, public health practices, education and banking and everything, right, lives within the system, no matter what country you are, where there's some inequalities. And those inequalities affect the institutions. They affect our relationships with people, and ergo, we internalize them, right? And so if you're a chemistry education researcher, then please always acknowledge that the students that are coming into your classroom have these experiences outside that are affecting their lives, right? If you have marginalized students, they live in worlds where they're constantly pressured to be kicked out of STEM, right? And you as an educator should acknowledge that. If you're a mentor, if you're a scientist, please also think about this when you're mentoring people. The next thing is that you need to reorient things from the individual to the system level. We love to say these things like people should be resilient, they should have grit, they should have passion, they should have perseverance, right? And so when they leave STEM, well, it's not my fault. They were not willing to jump all these obstacles that we put on their way. We bought the science, right? Like, it's not my fault they were lazy, right? That is basically what we're saying. And so instead of saying this, in which we're like blaming marginalized people from not jumping all the hoops we put on their way, let's look for, right, actually changing the system. And so, for example, if you're a chemistry education researcher, try to avoid using this type of theories that are assuming default as on the students. So try to look for anti-deficit theories. If you're a mentor, if you're a scientist, please acknowledge that it's not only about the mentoring you're doing in the lab, it's not only about the techniques you teach them, it's about also advocating for your students on the outside world, right? And giving them the resources that other people might not have given them before. The third thing is that we need to ground things on socio-historical context. So, hello, the Royal Society actually invested in slavery from 1660 to the 1700s. And ergo, the money that the Royal Society had back in that time, part of the generational wealth of the society was built on the backs of slaves. I know this is a shocker. And so what I'm saying very specifically, right? I'm not saying the Royal Society was built in a time where slavery was practiced. I'm saying the Royal Society took money from their coffers and invested it on slaves. And that is part of the way in which they generated their wealth. I also made a poll earlier on Twitter, and the answer was Robert Bull. Robert Bull was one of the first people to study skin color and to try to connect it to genetics and to the characteristics of people. And his research was used as justification for these things. And I'm running out of time, so I need to wrap this up. But the point is that if you're in a classroom, please acknowledge these things. If you're teaching chemistry, please acknowledge the science we're teaching was built on these principles. It's okay to acknowledge that we have done wrong in the past. And when we're doing research in chemistry education research, then let's acknowledge the groups we have left out in the past. Let's acknowledge the people we have not served correctly and that we have purposely blocked from success. And please stop using SATs as a measure of knowledge. They were created by two eugenicists. They literally believe Black people was less smart, and they designed a test to prove it, and then they sold that test to the College Board. And that is the test we're using today. So please stop using SAT. Please give in the College Board money. Please. And finally, I think that I'm still working on is to think how to use quantitative methods to do counter stories, so to magnify the stories, experiences, and narratives of marginalized communities, and to actually find norms to criticize quantitative methods in a way that is productive and helps the field grow. And this is something I'm currently working on. I want to thank the co-authors of this work on QuantCrit. So Catherine Husbein and Vanessa Rolfe are my scholar sisters, and I will die without them. And I also want to thank Megan Deshay. She's a grad student at Rhinestone Lab that is working with us. And I want to thank my PhD advisor, Christian Shan, Kevin Binning, my postdoctoral advisor at Pitt, and Tim McKay, my postdoc advisor at the University of Michigan, and the CAES Future Leaders in Chemistry program for all the support they've given me through the years. And thank you very much. So I'm going to stop sharing.
Paulette, thank you so much. Really eye-opening and important talk. Looks like I think people are still taking it all in.
It was a lot. I'm sorry.
Here's a question from Chelsea Martinez. What level of acknowledgement of things like Boyle's non-gas law research makes sense? If I typically don't go into the bios of white European chemists at all and focus rather on 21st century scientific research as a team effort, how do I do that acknowledgement justice?
Thank you for that question, and that is really important. So I'm not asking you to change your current practices. So if you're currently not going deeply into everybody's life, you don't need to do that. But something that you can do is say, you know, a lot of the science I'm teaching you currently, we believe most of it was invented by Europeans, and we have actually not acknowledged that a lot of this was actually created in other cultures, and we stole it. So you can do it that way. So you can do this more general acknowledgement of how like we perceive everything as created and invented of Europe rather than like it's being global and things have been stolen. What you can do is if you talk more about like current chemistry, contemporary chemistry, you can talk about highlight the work of marginalized scientists, right? So you're going to talk about organic chemistry, for example, right? Like look for work of marginalized scientists that do organic chemistry, and that is a way which you can do this justice, right? If you actually are talking about Boyle when you're doing gas law and stuff, maybe just talk about how, like, you know, all these people, they're really problematic things, and it's very important that we acknowledge they did them. And I'm not saying that so you hate them, I'm saying it because it's just important that you know, right? So that.
Okay, Vanessa Ralph asks, given the socio-historical context of STEM education, should we fix the system that, you know, should we use the master's tools, or should we just burn it all down?
Oh my God. I am so not surprised Vanessa asked this question. Different people think differently. I don't think we should burn stuff down. It will be hypocritical of me to tell you we should burn it all down while I'm trying to find a job in a research institution, right? Because I'm by de facto trying to find a job within the system. That will be hypocritical.
She wants me to emphasize, she says, how do we burn it down productively?
How do we burn it down productively? I think one of a productive burning down is to just get rid of SAT scores and get rid of GRE, right? That is a burning down kind of thing, right? Like, let's just not try to make the test better. Let's just acknowledge it was built on eugenics and just make it disappear. That is, I think, a productive burning down, right? So those are the type of things that we can do that I think can change the system for the better, without like saying, we're gonna start all universities today and like we have no jobs and we have no solution for immediate like now, right? So that is, I do think there's things we can just get rid of.
All right, and Nicole is saying in the chat that the experimental underpinnings of Boyle's law were actually done by Richard Townley, so he's the one that we should credit. Alexandra Gittins asks, how do we get more universities to invest in chemical educators and chemical education? That's the $1 million question.
That is a great question. So if you're a faculty member, right, please, the next time you discuss which line is going to be given funding, if you're going to hire your 20th organic chemist or your 10th like analytical chemist, say like, maybe we should just invest in chemistry education research, right? And so please advocate for us in your meetings. Please ask for a line, right? Be explicit and say, we should hire something that do this. Not only hire me, hire the amazing postdocs that are on my generation that are doing amazing work, right? So advocate for us. Right. And whenever somebody says chemistry education is not chemistry, is not science, tell them to shut up and to kindly read the work before judging us. Right. So advocate. That is what you can do.
All right. This is Anna Makarlimanov, and she's asking both you and Nicole. Do you have any advice on how to get into chemical education research for people with a background in other chemistry disciplines?
Nicole, is this closer to your experience so you can like answer this?
Yeah, I can take it if you want. I didn't want to step on.
Yeah, go ahead.
I did material science for my PhD, and I would say like read a lot. Number one, right? And if it's something that you want to do, talk to people that are doing it. One of the things that was really sort of a culture shock to me in chem ed research is how welcoming the field is. Like, you can just cold email people doing work that you like corresponding author on a paper you respect, and be like, I really love this work. Like, thanks for sharing it with the community. And in chem ed, those people will write you back and you can have a discussion with them. And really, that's a good way, I think, of meeting people in the field and sort of dipping your toes in. And then, you know, I found chem ed postdoc and have been in it ever since. So there are lots of paths to get in, but definitely I recommend starting by reading and reaching out to the people in the field already.
Yes, and Morgan Howe put her email on the chat, and you should reach out to her because she totally did that, and she will be able to give you like more of a step-by-step like answer, because that is not my experience. So I don't want to speak for people that actually went through that.
And this is also Renee saying, you know, take a page from JAWS and invite CER researchers to give seminars.
Yes, please.
Okay, here's another question for Paulette from Chelsea. Are you or anyone else you know looking into attitudes of chemists or STEM educators versus other disciplines regarding, quote, pandemic grit, especially for marginalized students? I've been really dismayed, almost of the point of wanting to quit, seeing this anecdotally.
Yes, particularly been trying to get some funding for this. I do think we are at risk of losing a whole generation of marginalized scientists because of what happened in the pandemic. We know that doing things online exacerbate inequalities because students that are in college, I'm not saying colleges are like the most equitable situation to be in, right? But like students at least have a roof over their like heads. They have like access to the cafeteria if they're in like a meal plan, right? Like there's some securities that the university provides to students, like internet access, the library, right? When we moved to online, all of this got like swept under the rocks and it disappeared, right? And so we cannot expect students that didn't have these resources at home to survive the same way that other students did, and then add to that like the trauma, etc. So I do think we need to study this because I think we are at danger of losing a whole generation of scientists because of this. And I've been trying to say this since the beginning of the pandemic, and I don't want us to in 10 years be doing retrospective studies to find this. So a lot of people on chemistry education are studying this. There was a special issue on the pandemic, and I think that now that things are settling down, and we're going to be able to get some data, we might be able to try to do some things to fix this, because I agree that the current landscape is not really good.
Okay, Stephen McNeil asks, he recognizes that the achievement gaps of marginalized students are due to systemic factors, but you still need to address them. So what are equitable instructional practices that can help address these concerns and promote success for marginalized students?
This is actually a great question. It is true, right? Like, even if I'm saying grades are not the best picture of somebody's knowledge, grades are still used to judge students, to get fellowships or students things that are meaningful. So the first thing that you should try to do is figure out what are the sources of these differences. So again, like depends on your institution. It may be that you have a lot of first generation students. It may be that you have, right? Like you need to sort of figure out what is the systemic specific issue, because that may help you give students a specific resources to that problem, right? Because not all of these things can be fixed the same way. Another thing that you can do is if you're doing group work, so one of the problems of active learning is that if we're doing group work, marginalized students sometimes are not allowed to speak. So make sure they're giving a voice and they're respected by the other students. So that is also a way of doing this. And then the other thing is that when you're looking at the effect of your changes, look at whether students that came in with lower knowledge, quote unquote, right, got higher gains, because what we want is student to have a higher gain, right? Because that way we end up with everybody on the same, like with the same grade at the end. Also try to do things that don't assume that only some people can get A's. Create a class where everybody should be getting A's, right? And that is not an obstacle.
Okay, here's one from Alex Pinto. In your opinion, what would be a good way to introduce inclusion concepts to the chemistry degree? How can we bring these to the classroom? And how can chemistry instructors effectively bring it into the curriculum?
This is actually really, it's one of the simpler things to do. I think that we should start by recognizing students that come into our classrooms are interested in things like pre-med, right? And so if they're pre-meds, right, what about we talk about medicinal chemistry? And how about we talk about how medicinal chemistry sometimes focuses on certain diseases versus others because of who gets them, right? So let's talk about it. That is a way of introducing these concepts. If you're doing a class that touches on environment and climate change, acknowledge environmental justice, acknowledge how pollution is a way of colonization, how pollution affects certain groups more than others, right? And so whenever you try to connect your chemistry to the real world, it's really easy to then connect it to the systemic issues, right? And so that is a way of doing it. Another way of doing it also is by historically acknowledging the problems or by highlighting the work of current people. But I like focusing on what we can do to change, right? So environmental justice, climate change, medicinal chemistry, all of these things are great ways of showing people that even though we do molecule work, so like we don't deal with people in our labs, right? We actually affect the world in a really important way, and then we should care about it.
Okay, and here is, it looks like the last question in the Q&A box is again from Alexandra. Thank you for answering all my questions. DEI efforts and DE&I education is very important to me. However, it seems like only those already interested are the ones to attend and better themselves, not the ones who really need to change. So how do we balance forcing mandatory trainings and inviting people voluntarily into conversations that they aren't used to having?
So have these conversations not in trainings. Have these conversations when you're recruiting. Have these conversations where you're discussing what classes you're going to teach, who's going to teach the classes, who are you giving offers for grad school. So we keep having these discussions like they should happen in trainings or in committees for DEI, when they should be happening at every single level in the chemistry department, right? So when we say, who are we inviting for grad students to this recruitment weekend? Are we actually inviting only white students? Are we actually inviting only men? Right? Ask these questions, put them up front. Say, these are uncomfortable topics. We're gonna feel uncomfortable when we realize we suck at this, right? And it's important because when we're uncomfortable, we grow. Think about when you started learning chemistry and you didn't understand a concept. You feel uncomfortable. You feel like maybe you were not smart, right? But you worked through it and then you ended up understanding chemistry. It's exactly the same thing. Feel uncomfortable. Allow yourself to do it and grow from it. And if somebody says something racist or sexist or ableist, call them out on the moment. Don't be the person that comes to me at the end of the meeting and says, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't know what to say when this person said this thing. That doesn't work for me, right? Don't tell me you noticed this person was being terrible and then you didn't do anything about it. Speak up, right? Speak up for those of us who don't have the power to do so. That is really, really, really important.
All right. One last question that I had.
Yes.
So when I was in graduate school, once in a while, I would go back and I'd look at a paper in a journal called Journal of Organometallic Chemistry. And in the 1970s, what this journal used to do is it would just publish the paper in whatever language it was written in. And so literally, like, you'd leaf through the journal and there'd be a paper in Spanish or a paper in Italian, and that's just what was there. And if you wanted to read it, you needed to go find somebody who spoke Spanish to help you read it. And it's really interesting, right? Because it seems so nowadays, you know, it's amazing that they used to do that, because I feel like if you tried to do that now, you know, there would be all sorts of controversy about it and so on and so forth. But I'm wondering, do you think that it's really time to think about that, time to say that, you know, we shouldn't demand that absolutely everybody write all their papers in English?
I mean, I've always said that English is horrible and that I don't understand why we write on it, but this is my personal bias. This is a controversial question. I will say this. I think we should, if we're expecting people to write in English, then we should not charge them to pay editors to fix English. So if you're a journal that you're gonna force people to like pay somebody to edit it, don't do that. Right? Like, if we're gonna keep this thing that we should have this universal quote unquote language to communicate between ourselves, then don't force people to pay for this. Give them the money to pay for it, or give them the access to do this. That is point number one. Point number two, if you want to do things on different languages, then we actually need to provide translation services, right? And so that, like, then not only publish it in German, find somebody to translate it and have it in both languages. That is something that actually in Mexico we do. Like, I think some journals actually publish both the things at the same time in English and Spanish. That could be a thing that we can do. I think that more important than publishing in different languages is that chemistry education is actually given space on these journals. And so, like, instead of being relegated to the chemistry of education research journal, we are published in Journal of Organometallics and Journal of Organic Chemistry in science, right? In the science section, not in the social sciences section, right? I think that is way more, that is more my fight. I'm not gonna do the fight of the language thing personally. If somebody wants to take it up, please, we should burn everything to the ground, as Vanessa said. And so, but somebody should focus on that fight specifically. But I do think that is more about what do we do, right? If we're expecting people to write in English, don't say, this is clearly a non-English author in the reviews. So clearly you need an editor. Please don't send that to people. Like, it hurts a lot. And sometimes the people are actually English speakers. So don't assume they are not English native speakers. And make the process free. I'm pretty sure with all the money journals charge for a subscription, they can create an editing service so people can like help with their English. I'm just saying, controversial concept also. And so if we're gonna publish both language, then pay for the translation because we want things to be accessible, right? And so the problem is not the language per se, is the practices around it.
Right. All right. I think I turn it back over to Madison now, right?
Yes, you do. Thank you, Dr. Nicole James, and congratulations on your recent appointment. Yay, celebrate, clap, clap, sparkle. Sorry. And congratulations to Paulette on your future hiring. Hopefully someone here will get Paulette a job. But realistically, like, thank you for this awesome introduction. Not introduction, we've had other chem ed talks, but this like kind of primer on 2 aspects of chemistry education. And as Katie said in the chat, hire Paulette. But really, thanks to everybody who attended today with like this record turnout of numbers and engagement. We really look forward to seeing you all in the future as well. Thank you to Cell Reports Physical Sciences for supporting the captioning of this seminar series. We hope it was helpful to you if you needed it. We encourage you all to spread the word about the seminar series, not only on Twitter, but word of mouth really helps to get kind of outside of the chemistry bubble, and to submit abstracts if you have research. If you have research that's not published, if you have research that's just kind of like your life's work and you want to present yourself like Paulette did, we really encourage that, but we really can't keep doing this if we don't receive your abstracts. So if you know any undergrads who are doing their senior thesis, or if you know someone who just defended their PhD thesis, please send them our way. And hopefully we can give them a platform to present in the future. This is a really great opportunity for students, postdocs, early career PIs, really everybody in the chemistry community who's early in their career. So we hope to see you all again next Tuesday, May the 18th at 11 a.m. New York time, Eastern Standard Time, for our next seminar. And we hope you have a great rest of your day, wherever, whenever you are. Thanks.